Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a series of podcasts produced by the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation on the issues that matter to us and the issues that we know matter to you too. Prevention, research, addiction, treatment, and recovery support. I'm your host, William Moyers, and joining us today is Dr. Marvin Seppala, the Chief Medical Officer of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. Welcome, Marv.
Thanks, William.
Good to have you with us again today, because today we're talking about a doctor's discusses alcohol withdrawal, detox, and treatment. And I know you know a lot about this experience. Tell us, alcoholism, we've sort of lost touch with that word as it relates to the opioid epidemic and the debate about legalization of marijuana and the return of methamphetamine. Alcoholism, it still is a big issue.
It is. It remains the biggest issue in the addiction field. You know, in our settings, about 60% of our patients
Really?
have alcohol use disorder. If you look at the data associated with, finances, the money spent on addiction and its problems, again, alcoholism is way above everything else. The death rate from alcoholism is way above everything else, way above the opioid crisis. So it's just in the opioid crisis, sudden death, a lot of young people, really obvious. Alcoholism, usually after long, long periods of drinking, where people are kind of isolated because of the psychosocial issues associated with this disease.
A lot of people think that you have to be using alcohol for long periods of time before you develop a problem with it. That's not true, is it?
No, it isn't necessarily true. On average, so an average is, or a balance basically, but 10 years of drinking before you really become alcoholic, that's certainly not true for everyone. People that are really committed and disciplined about their alcohol use can become alcoholic very quickly, actually.
What are the signs and symptoms that somebody's use of alcohol is progressing into full-blown addiction to alcohol?
If they start really using a lot of alcohol and not showing much effect of it, so their tolerance is developing pretty dramatically, that's a symptom you can readily notice if you're a family member close to them. Withdrawal symptoms, they're shaky in the morning or starting to drink early in the day, maybe even in the morning to prevent withdrawal. Usually, we notice the shakiness, but they might have nausea and vomiting. They might be really sweaty, unable to really think clearly. And then all of a sudden they have some alcohol and they look great. That's pretty diagnostic of a withdrawal syndrome, maybe not alcoholism, but probably. Consequences start to show up in their families and their social life, that sort of thing, and they don't pay attention to them. They just keep drinking instead. Their lives start to narrow, where they had all kinds of other interests, hobbies, things they used to really enjoy doing, and all this, over time, that stuff all diminishes, and everything they do is surrounded by the alcohol. Their life perspective becomes kind of ways of using alcohol as much as possible, really, instead of attending to the things they used to like.
And what about withdrawal? How does somebody know they're going into withdrawal, and what effect does the lack of alcohol in the alcoholic system cause in terms of its impact on the body?
So when people are going, the shakiness, the tremor, that's going to be the first sort of thing that shows up in alcohol withdrawal. Not necessarily DTs. So let's say it starts mildly.
Okay.
So they get kind of shaky, feel this tremulousness, even in their tongue. It can be in any muscle. Sweaty, just not feeling right, nausea, maybe vomiting, and their blood pressure can go up, their pulse can go up, respiratory rate can go up, their body temperature can go up. So a lot of things are going on, and for most people that drink regularly, they kind of know, wake up in the morning and it's been several hours since that last drink. If they're drinking on a daily basis at fairly high levels, their withdrawal is going to be fairly significant in the morning. Even sleep is disrupted. Most people with an alcohol use disorder, at least a moderate to severe one, they're going to try and drink enough to get some sleep at night. But the trouble is they start going into withdrawal within a few hours, and that'll wake them right up because of all this kind of stimulatory nature of alcohol withdrawal. with that, alcohol will relieve it. So that's what you start watching for. Are they really drinking early in the day? Are they sneaking away for a drink in the morning? Whatever that eliminates all of this. Now, from a neurobiological perspective, what's going on is that alcohol affects the GABA receptors in our brains, and those are the primary inhibitory neurotransmitters, which really are a calming neurotransmitter system that kind of limit activity, help people calm down, help people sleep, relax, that sort of thing. And early, a drink or two, that's how people feel. They're relaxed, right? They feel a little bit better that way. Over time, if you're drinking alcohol on a daily basis or in high amounts regularly, that GABA system, it doesn't need to be that much, calmer, right? So the brain starts to respond because it wants to keep the person up and walking and talking instead of falling down and falling asleep and passing out. And so the stimulatory neurotransmitters, in particular glutamate, which is the primary stimulatory neurotransmitter that does keep us moving and doing things, those start to get increased. So the GABA system's down-regulating this calming system because alcohol is taking care of that part of it. Mm-hmm. And in response to that, the stimulatory, this glutamate system and other stimulatory neurotransmitters start getting exaggerated. And the more you drink, for the longer you drink, the more out of balance this gets. But it looks like it's kind of imbalanced because you're able to drink and kind of function. Well, if you suddenly stop drinking, that system is way out of balance. The ratio is way off, and the stimulatory part of the system is really elevated, and the calming part is really low. So one's upregulated, one's downregulated. And so alcohol use, looks like calming, can fall asleep, all these things associated with that, calming system, the GABA system, is the opposite of alcohol withdrawal, where all of a sudden you're completely anxious, tremulous, shaken, can't think straight, nausea, vomit. All these things are associated with that stimulatory system. It's no longer balanced by the calming system nor the alcohol. So it's driving everything, even to the point that you could have seizures, just kind of the most extreme of sort of electronic stimulatory activity in the brain. And even the DTs, delirium tremens, when it just overcomes our ability to think and function to the point that we can die from it.
So what should somebody do who's going into withdrawal from alcohol, too much alcohol use? What should they do, or what should a family member do?
It can kill people. It can be really unsafe, especially if it's high use for long periods of time. So they should get into a medical system.
Like an ER?
They could go to an ER. It wouldn't be ideal because, you go to an ER and they send you out. They might give you a little bit of medication to help with your withdrawal, but if it isn't for a few days, that could be dangerous. It could be that you go to an ER and they're going to admit you to the hospital, which may be a good thing. You could call a treatment center like our own. We have residential treatment with medical services units that provide for this type of alcohol withdrawal day in and day out. It's just kind of bread and butter in those settings. So a good evaluation by a medical professional, either in an ER or a clinic or somewhere, or go straight into a treatment center and get the medical care you need to transition into this alcohol-free state in a real smooth, safe manner.
As I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the opioid epidemic has certainly seized the national attention and gotten all the headlines. The legalization of marijuana is what it is. We have a podcast actually on the marijuana issue. But when the alcoholic out there reads or hears about these things, he or she may think they have a problem, but they're not as bad, say, as those opioid or those heroin addicts, and they're not as, as willful as those marijuana addicts. Can alcoholics be treated in the same environment as others who are struggling with a dependence on a substance?
It actually works really well to have people in the same environment.
Why?
Yeah, because although these addictions are different in a lot of ways socially, and they look different when we meet these people, and there may be different age groups and different interests, there's always something that they can learn from each other. And it's in that identification, in establishing, the relationships, the fellowship found among people in 12-step programs and other group settings where people get into recovery. That's what can make the difference, and it doesn't really matter what drug. They all have pretty specific aspects to them.
Sure.
For people with an alcohol use disorder, they could look just awful on admission to our residential facility. Just terrible, because alcohol, it has such a huge role in undermining people physically and mentally. However, they get over it really quick. A couple of weeks later, they look great, and and yet somebody that has methamphetamine, let's say they come in and their memory's shot.
Sure.
Because it can affect parts of the brains and harm brain cells in their memory parts of the brains in such a way that they can not learn new information. And alcoholics can look like that when they arrive, but a month later, they look great, or certainly much better. So, alcohol, among the substances of, intoxication that we use, is one of the only ones that kills brain cells.
Oh, interesting.
And any amount of alcohol kills brain cells. So someone who drinks one beer will lose some brain cells. Someone who drinks one shot will lose some brain cells. And we lose brain cells all the time for all kinds of reasons. So in a way, it's not considered that big a deal. But if you're drinking a lot and over time, the old terminology about wet brain,
yes,
in reference to alcoholics, had to do with there was so much loss of brain cells that the brain itself shrunk inside the skull, allowing for fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, to kind of fill that empty space. And so if you took a brain scan, you'd see all this fluid, and called a wet brain because it's all filled with fluid now. All because of that death of brain cells. And you think of the opioids by comparison, they're killing at remarkable rates right now from overdose. But the opioids don't harm our brain cells. We have an internal opioid system with receptors made for those substances, and they don't harm us unless we take too much. I mean, you could have basically stop breathing from opioids and then be revived, and while you stop breathing, have a lack of circulation, blood circulation through your brain, and kill off a whole bunch of brain cells, and be left unable to move your whole left side or unable to think anymore and remember anything. But it wasn't the opioid, by itself harming those cells. Is because you stopped breathing. A remarkable different mechanism of action. And alcohol is a solvent. If you put your hand in alcohol long enough, it would absorb some. And that was why we couldn't study alcohol in the brain for so long, because there's not a distinct receptor for it. It goes all over. And it was really hard to study initially. Now we know a lot about it, and fortunately so, because it's helped us develop medicines for alcohol use disorders and to figure out all this withdrawal stuff we've been talking about. But it's, when I was in college, I took a chemistry course. Preparing for medical school, I got to take chemistry. In the book I had, there was a whole chapter on alcohols. And there's hundreds of alcohols. I didn't know this before this course. And there's only one that humans can safely ingest. Ethyl alcohol. All the rest kill you almost immediately. All those other hundreds, and this one just slowly kills you by eating away at your brain and your liver and all these other parts of your body, right? So it's really, really odd. They're all toxic. It's just this one we tolerate somehow.
And yet, despite the destructive nature of alcohol, it is possible to recover and to regain a healthy life, a productive life, an engaging life. Recovery from alcoholism is possible.
It sure is, and really good recovery rates. In our settings, over 60% of people with an alcohol use disorder are sober at 1 year. really remarkable, and doing really well. We look not just at are they sober, but what's their quality of life. And you have
Yes.
multiple measures used in the research literature about that, and their quality of life is dramatically better once sober. And we see real miracles. People getting their jobs back, reestablishing their families, going on to do remarkable things in their lives. Like
Look
you
at
and me.
Yeah, anything's possible.
It's true.
Well, we'll end on that positive note. There's hope. Just look at us. All right, but Dr. Seppala, thank you very much for bringing your remarkable depth and breadth of professional experience and your personal passion to these subjects today. I know you've left our fans of the podcast, I know you've left them with a lot of hope today. So thanks a lot for joining us. And thanks to all of you for joining us for another edition of Let's Talk, a series of podcasts on the issues that matter to Hazelden Betty Ford, and we know matter to you too. Again, I'm your host, William Moyers. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again.